Serenity Valley Stories introduces Morgan's descent into the silent shadows of the Smoky Mountains. The smell of damp earth clung to the air as I trudged deeper into the Smoky Mountains, each step pushing me further away from the familiar trails and into the unknown. My breath misted in the cool morning air, mingling with the scents of pine needles and decaying leaves. The forest was alive with sounds, the soft rustle of wine through the trees, the distant call of a bird, the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. But beneath it all, there was a silence that felt almost aware. I adjusted my backpack, the weight of my gear pulling at my shoulders, and tried to push the growing sense of unease to the back of my mind. This was what I had come for, after all. My dissertation on human social behavior in isolated environments needed something unique, something that would set it apart. And the legends of feral people living deep within the Smoky Mountains? That was as unique as it got. The stories I had dug up were vague at best, hushed whispers of encounters, disappearances, and sightings too strange to be anything but myths. But myths always had a seed of truth, and I was determined to find it. I wasn't afraid of the dark, of the wild, of the unknown. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I had been hiking for hours, my path taking me farther and farther away from civilization. The dense undergrowth slowed my progress, and soon, the trail I had been following faded into nothing more than a faint memory. The air was heavy with moisture, and the oppressive stillness pressed down on me, amplifying every sound. The snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, each noise sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, heightening my senses to a razor's edge. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I found what I had been searching for, a small, hidden clearing nestled between ancient trees. The remnants of a fire pit, overgrown with moss and ivy, were the only signs that anyone had ever been here. I crouched down, examining the ground closely. The soil was disturbed, footprints barely visible in the fading light. They were human, but there was something off about them, too wide, too long. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Setting up my camp for the night was a meticulous process, each task serving as a temporary distraction from the gnawing sense of unease that had settled in my gut. The tent was pitched close to a thick cluster of trees, providing a semblance of security, while my equipment, camera, audio recorder, and a small notebook, was placed strategically around the clearing. Every sound, every movement in the underbrush, was noted with growing paranoia. Nightfall came swiftly, the darkness swallowing the forest whole. The air grew colder, the forest darker, the shadows deeper. The sounds of nocturnal creatures emerged, hoots, howls, and the occasional rustle of something large moving through the underbrush. But there was one sound that stood out, one that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, a low, guttural growl, barely audible but unmistakable. My pulse quickened. I scanned the tree-line, every muscle in my body tense. The growl came again, closer this time, and I caught a glimpse of movement, something, someone, darting between the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized with chilling clarity that the legends were true. They were here. I scrambled to pack up my gear, every instinct screaming at me to run, but before I could even take a step, a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, gaunt, with matted hair and skin that seemed to blend into the shadows, it stared at me with eyes that gleamed with a predatory intelligence. It wasn't alone. More figures materialized from the darkness, surrounding me, cutting off any chance of escape. I bolted, adrenaline flooding my system, my only thought to get away. Branches tore at my clothes, roots threatened to trip me, but I pushed forward, driven by sheer terror. Behind me, I could hear them, crashing through the underbrush, their breath hot and heavy, their growls growing louder, closer. I stumbled, falling hard against a tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They were almost upon me. I could feel their presence, their hunger, their madness. Desperation gave me strength, and I forced myself to my feet, running blindly through the forest, not caring where I went, just needing to get away. The forest became a maze of shadows and looming trees, each step taking me deeper into the unknown. My senses were on high alert, every sound amplified to a deafening volume. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig, it all sent my heart racing. I could feel them closing in, their presence a constant pressure on my mind. I reached a small stream, its waters dark and swift in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. I splashed across, my boots sinking into the soft mud on the other side, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused on one thing, survival. I didn't dare stop, not even to catch my breath. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye. I turned just in time to see one of them, lean, with wild eyes and a twisted smile, emerge from the trees. It lunged at me, hands outstretched, and I barely managed to dodge, slipping on the muddy bank and crashing to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle, but I didn't have time to think about it. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of my pursuers' ragged breaths close behind. I pushed through the pain, limping but still moving, the forest a blur around me. My lungs burned, my body screamed for rest, but I knew that stopping meant death. The ground beneath me sloped upward, the climb steep and unforgiving. I clawed at roots and rocks, dragging myself up, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as I gained altitude. At the top of the ridge, I paused, gasping for breath, and looked back. The forest below was dark, the trees casting long, twisted shadows. There was no sign of them, but I knew better than to let my guard down. I had to keep moving. As I turned to continue, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I tumbled down a hidden slope, the world spinning around me as I crashed through the underbrush. My fall ended abruptly as I slammed into something solid. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment, I lay there, dazed and disoriented. When my vision cleared, I found myself at the edge of a ravine, the sides steep and rocky. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and I realized with a jolt that I had landed near the top of a waterfall. The river surged below, white and frothy as it cascaded down the rocks, disappearing into the darkness. I struggled to my feet, my body aching, and scanned the area. There was no sign of my pursuers, but the eerie silence of the forest told me they were near. I had no choice. The river was my only way out. The climb down the ravine was treacherous. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, and more than once I nearly lost my balance. The air was thick with the smell of damp moss and wet stone, the roar of the waterfall growing louder with each step. Finally, I reached the edge, where the water surged over the cliff in a frothing, violent cascade. There was no time to hesitate. I could hear them again, their voices echoing through the trees, a guttural language I couldn't understand. They were close, too close. With a deep breath, I leaped into the void. The cold was a shock, the water closing over me like a vice. The current grabbed me, pulling me down, spinning me in its grip. I fought to the surface, gasping for air, only to be dragged under again. The world was a chaotic blur of water and darkness, my body battered by rocks and debris. Somehow, I broke free of the waterfall's grip, the current carrying me downstream. My body was numb with cold, my mind a fog of pain and fear. I floated on my back, letting the river take me, too exhausted to fight. The river twisted and turned, the banks rising steep and unforgiving on either side. I caught glimpses of the forest through the trees, dark and foreboding, but there was no sign of them. The feral people had been left behind, the river my unlikely savior. After what felt like an eternity, the river began to slow, the current easing as the terrain leveled out. I managed to drag myself to the shore, every muscle screaming in protest. I collapsed on the rocky bank, the cold seeping into my bones, but I didn't care. I was alive. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the sky. The clouds had parted, revealing a blanket of stars, cold and distant. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a reminder that I had survived. But the fear, the terror, it lingered, a dark stain on my soul. Eventually, I forced myself to move. My body protested with every step, but I couldn't stay here. I had to keep going, had to find my way back to civilization. The forest was still dangerous, the shadows still full of unknown threats. As I walked, the events of the night replayed in my mind, the feral people, the chase, the waterfall. It all seemed surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But the pain, the cold, the exhaustion, they were all too real. I had come here seeking answers, hoping to uncover the truth behind the legends. I had found more than I bargained for. The feral people were real, a dark secret hidden in the depths of the Smoky Mountains. And I had barely escaped with my life. Hours passed as I stumbled through the forest, following the river as it wound its way through the mountains. The sun began to rise, casting the world in a pale, golden light. The warmth was a small comfort, but it did little to ease the chill in my bones. Finally, I emerged from the forest, the sight of a familiar trail bringing tears to my eyes. I had made it. I was safe. But the experience had changed me, left me scarred in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. As I followed the trail back to civilization, I knew one thing for certain: I would never speak of what I had seen, never share the horrors I had witnessed. Some legends were better left undiscovered, some truths better left buried. The Smoky Mountains held their secrets close, and I had been a fool to think I could unravel them. The feral people were out there, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. And I had no desire to ever encounter them again. The memory of their eyes, dark, hungry, full of malice, would haunt me forever. I had escaped, but I would never truly be free. The mountains had marked me, and their shadows would follow me wherever I went. As I reached the edge of the park, the sounds of civilization growing closer, I allowed myself one last glance back at the forest. The trees stood tall and silent, their secrets hidden in the shadows. I turned away, leaving the darkness behind, but knowing it would never truly leave me. The Smoky Mountains had claimed a part of me, and I knew I would never be the same. Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.